Hello and welcome to Headlines. Mutual accusations of ceasefire violations, claims and counterclaims continue to dominate the discourse surrounding the Gaza ceasefire deal, with the arrangement itself being threatened after Hamas leadership had provisionally delayed the next round of hostage release, citing Israeli non-compliance of the agreement. To be more precise, Abu Obaida, spokesperson for Hamas, earlier stated that the next handover of the hostages, scheduled to be released next Saturday, would be postponed until further notice, unless the Israeli side commits and compensates for the entitlements of the past weeks. In a subsequent statement, Hamas said that there was still an opportunity for the next round to go forward as envisioned, with its move serving as a warning to the other side. Israel described the postponement as a complete violation of the ceasefire, expressing its readiness to prepare for any possible scenario in Gaza, with the United States President Donald Trump stating that Israel should cancel the ceasefire deal unless Hamas resolves to release all remaining hostages by Saturday. Joining me now is Maurice Hirsch from the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Welcome, Mr. Hirsch.
Hi, thank you for having me.
My first question to you is about this landscape of claims and counterclaims. Hamas is accusing of Israel of violating the ceasefire deal, and Israel is accusing Hamas. My question to you is very basic. Could these claims, counterclaims, lead to the collapse of the deal this week? I'm not just talking about the collapse of the swap deal, but also whole arrangement.
So I think what we first have to understand, and it's important that we take into account, is that we're not talking about an equal equation here. We're not talking about Israel on the one side and Hamas on the other side. We're talking about a democratic, law-abiding country on the one hand and barbarians on the other side. This is a genocidal terrorist organization that raped, pillaged, murdered, tortured, burned people alive. So to now say that they are claiming that Israel has breached the agreement is like listening to the Nazis saying, well, you know what, it was unacceptable that the world invaded Germany. This is something which is completely unacceptable. It is terminology that really should be avoided. And so to your question, is it possible that these genocidal terrorists have had a change of heart and have seen the impact of releasing the hostages basically almost starved to death on their image, and that they're now trying to change the rules of the games? Yes, it's certainly possible that that is what they're aiming to do.
And also, specifically about those demands, I realize that you already said that this is not an arrangement between equals. You treat Hamas in a way that you explained in the clearest possible way. So their demands are the following. They claim that Israel is delaying the return of the displaced to the northern Gaza Strip. They're also claiming that Israel is targeting civilians there in different parts of the Gaza Strip. And they're also saying that Israel is blocking the entry of relief supplies in all their form, according to what was agreed. Apart from what you think about Hamas in principle, what do you make of those demands and those claims?
Well, I think that we have to understand that what's happened really in the last 2.5, 3 weeks of the deal that's already gone into force is that Israel has pulled its forces out of the northern Gaza Strip, with the exception of that security parameter. Israel has now completed its withdrawal from the Netzarim corridor, which is really the corridor in the center of the Gaza Strip that split the south from the north, and there are no more Israeli forces there. We have, as agreed in the deal, the security forces from the US that are inspecting the movement of the people and vehicles going north. And we've seen hundreds of thousands of Gazans returning. I mean, we've seen the pictures all over the internet of those Gazans returning to the north of the Gaza Strip. We've seen hundreds of trucks of the humanitarian aid meeting the criteria set in the deal going into the Gaza Strip. And so to now give any credence to Hamas's claims against Israel is ready to play into that narrative of the genocidal terrorists will make anything up and we hope that the world will believe us, even though there's no reason why anyone really should.
US President Donald Trump very recently, in fact, I think yesterday, said that Israel should cancel the ceasefire deal in its full entirety and let all hell break out. And I quote Donald Trump when I say that. Unless Hamas release all remaining hostages by Saturday. This demand goes beyond the scope of what was agreed upon. How do you evaluate the impact of this statement? Some analysts say that it does inject a new degree of fresh uncertainty into an already fragile agreement. And to what extent do you think it will encourage Israel to take more decisive actions on the ground in relation to Hamas? Because Israel has already made it very clear that they maintain, I think, the full operational scope if need be. So would you say that this particular statement would encourage Israel to be even more decisive on the ground?
I think what we're seeing at the moment is Donald Trump's response to the grotesque pictures that Hamas broadcast around the world, freeing the Israeli hostages, almost starved to death, as I mentioned, and then parading them in front of the shouting crowds, allowing some of the hostages to openly express their desire to return to their family when the terrorists know full well that they've murdered Eli Sharabi's wife and children. These are despicable pictures of terrorists that have saved no amount of pain, torture, and anguish from anyone. And I think that the responsible and really the moral response of the world should be, this cannot carry on any longer. They cannot be allowed to further abuse the hostages and to turn this into a weekly show of the grotesque. This needs to end. I would have said not wait even till Saturday at 12 o'clock to immediately demand the release of all of the hostages. And if not, these Hamas terrorists who we've seen fully fed, parading around on stages that they've created for the event in order to further humiliate the hostages, really do pay the full price for their atrocities.
We know that protesters gathered in the Hostages Square in Tel Aviv, demanding that the government should prioritize negotiations for the return of captives, hostages. What is the impact of public opinion on the Israeli government now? Because we understand that Israel wants to get all the hostages back, and it's probably one of those factors that limit the scope of its maneuverability on the ground as well. To what extent the fact that there are hostages which are currently in Gaza, controlled by Hamas, this factor actually limits Israel to the extent of not being able to do what it would have normally done had the hostages been back?
And so what we have to say already is that Israel has paid a really a substantial price for even to get to this stage of the implementation of the deal. We've seen hundreds of murderers, mass murderers, being released by Israel. We had a terrorist by the name of Mohammed Abu Varda. Excuse me, Mohammed Abu Varda, someone who had been convicted and sentenced to 48 life sentences for murdering 48 people in different bus bombings. He's been released. We had really terrorists, mass murderers being released already, and the withdrawal of the Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip, the return of the Gazan civilians to the north of the Gaza Strip. Israel has already shown that it is serious and has a desire to pay even extremely heavy price for the freeing of the hostages. And yet what we're dealing with again is a genocidal terrorist organization that's going to use the hostages until the nth degree in order to leverage them against Israel to get as much as they can. And so at some stage you have to draw a red line and say, you know what, we're done playing this game of the hostages in the hands of this genocidal terrorist group, and we're now going to do everything that we need to do operationally on the ground in order to secure their release without any limitations, and moving forward as quickly as possible. So I think that it could be a very sharp change in the policy.
A more practical question concerning this particular week. We understand that this ceasefire deal is not a peace treaty, and the element of possible escalation is still there. We cannot exclude any possibility. But still, as long as this particular week is concerned and the 6th round of hostage prisoner swap, which should take place on Saturday, is concerned, are you hopeful that this obstacle will be dealt with, and the deal will continue to be function? Because we understand the collapse of the deal is also a distinct possibility.
I think that we're probably more likely to see a collapse of the deal. As we know, 16 days into the deal, we were meant to start the second round of negotiations for the following release of additional hostages. Hamas is playing around with those negotiations as well, and is refusing to even really start the negotiations as they'd already committed themselves to doing. We've seen really this a parading of the hostages, which wasn't meant to be part of the deal. It was a part of Hamas's desire to really show that they are in control and that they can abuse and humiliate the hostages over and over again. We've had just information today that one of the hostages, an 86-year-old Holocaust survivor who was taken by the genocidal terrorists on the 7th of October, has been murdered whilst in captivity. Really, there is no limits and no depths to which the terrorists are willing to seek. And so that has to have some type of consequences. And I fear that because of the actions of the terrorists, we are going to get to a stage where this negotiation blows up. And really, the people who are going to pay the price for it is the Gazan civilians. If those Gazan civilians are no longer willing and desirous to pay the price for what Hamas is doing, they should now rise up against Hamas, throw them out, and ensure the return of the hostages. It is impossible to argue that huge civilian population doesn't know where the hostages are.
Sorry, do you in your analysis distinguish between Gazan civilians and Hamas, which is in charge of the Gaza Strip? Because you mentioned earlier that this deal between Israel and Hamas is not a deal between equals, because Israel is a sovereign state recognized by international community, whereas Hamas is not a state actor. Who would be your equal in the Gaza Strip if it comes to that later?
Well, there is at the moment there is no equal to Israel in the Gaza Strip.
And Gazans do not have agency as such.
They had agency in 2006. If you remember, they went to the last elections in the Palestinian Authority. They could have held elections whenever they wanted to since then, but they chose not to. In 2006, they were the ones who, the civilian population in Gaza, elected Hamas openly, freely. So it's hard to say that they don't have agency, but yes, nonetheless, there is a distinction between the civilian population in Gaza and the Hamas terrorists, and we expect those civilians to make sure that they have their own best interests at heart, and Hamas parading and abusing the hostages is not having the interests of those Gazans at heart. It's having the interests of Hamas and only Hamas.
Am I right to conclude from what you said that for what's happening in Gaza and for the potential collapse of the deal, Gazans are also going to be responsible, although they do not have an agency as such?
The Gazans are, yes, they're going to unfortunately pay the price. Israel really tried to do as much as it could in order to differentiate between the civilian population and the terrorists. Prime Minister Netanyahu even made a promise to pay any civilian who brings a hostage back to Israel $5 million and safe passage out of the Gaza Strip. He did that already months ago. 0 hostages have been brought to Israel as a result of that. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is that Hamas taking control of the entire Gaza Strip, and the civilian population, whilst it is paying the price of the war, not taking any initiative whatsoever to bring this situation to an end. It would almost seem as if they are full-heartedly supporting Hamas themselves.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hirsch. That was abundantly clear. Thank you very much indeed. This was Maurice Hirsch from the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. We discussed the latest situation involving possible imminent collapse of the Gaza ceasefire deal. See you very soon indeed.